What is the scariest story you know that is 100% true? Was working the evening shift at a gas station. Man comes in all disoriented. I go to help him out. He has a gash on his head and doesn't know where he was. I couldn't see any crashes around, so assumed he had fallen or something. Normally we are supposed to stay inside the glass-shielded register area whenever anyone is in the store. I, being a nice human being, went to help while calling the police/EMS. They got there and checked him out. They thought his head may have been fractured. Took him to the ER. I went back to work. Cops stopped back by for some coffee a few hours later. They told me the guy got hit by a baseball bat trying to break into a little girl's bedroom and was wanted for rape and murder in 2 other states. I never left the register area at night again. The story of Mary Vincent always stands out to me. In 1978, 15-year-old Mary was hitchhiking. A man named Lawrence Singleton picked her up. He brutally raped her and eventually made her get out of the car. She planned to run, but he noticed and cut both her arms off. He threw her into a ditch/ravine and left her to die. She packed her stumps with mud to stop the bleeding and spent all night crawling out. She eventually makes it to the highway and starts walking, naked and covered in blood. The first car that saw her sped away in fear. The second car was a couple on their honeymoon. They picked her up and she survived. My dad and some friends got drunk and went for a drive on some back roads and were going as fast as the truck would go as teenagers. My dad was slightly less drunk than the others and eventually demanded they let him get out. They pulled over and he and one other girl got out. He and the girl started walking to town while the other 3 sped off in the opposite direction. Well, less than a mile up the road from where they got out is an extremely sharp turn, which they missed and hit a tree going pretty close to triple digits miles per hour. 2 of them died on impact, and the only reason the third survived is because they crashed in front of a house that 2 doctors lived in. The survivor was paralyzed and lost his leg and part of his arm and was in the hospital for 8 months before dying. This was in the 60s, so medical care wasn't what it is today. When I first got my permit, my dad took me to that corner to explain the importance of safe driving. It gave me goosebumps about how close he was to being in the truck. He said that the dad of the driver got what remained of the truck to be hung up in the center of town for months after, to be a warning to all. This is a hometown story that stayed with me. It happened literally right around the corner from where I grew up. Maybe a 2-minute drive away. Judy Kirby murdered 6 children and 1 adult by intentionally driving the wrong way on a divided highway in an attempt to commit suicide. She had been hospitalized for depression, but had also just ended a relationship with her ex-husband's brother and was by some reports involved in drug trafficking and fearing an imminent arrest. She picked up her sister's son, who was celebrating his 10th birthday that day. She then loaded her 3 children into the car, supposedly to pick up a gift for the nephew. Instead, she went missing with a carload of kids. A short time later, calls started coming into 911 about a car going the wrong way down the highway at a high rate of speed. They made it about 90 seconds before a head-on collision with another vehicle, driven by a father with 2 children and another child along for the ride. The crash annihilated both vehicles. The only survivors were Kirby herself and a child who was along for the ride in the other car. There were pieces of children all over the highway. She was sentenced to 215 years in prison. My brother's ex-GF had 2 older sisters. They died before she was born. One day they decided to play hide and seek or something. So anyway, they both climbed inside a chest and accidentally locked themselves in. They suffocated. Nutty Putty Cave in Utah was sealed up in 2009 after John Jones was trapped upside down in a small crevice while spelunking. When rescue teams finally arrived, he had been upside down for so long that his legs were drained of blood. The only possible way to have gotten him out was to break his legs, which would have sent him into fatal shock. He died after being trapped for 28 hours. His boat is still in the cave. A high-priority inmate who could implicate dozens of wealthy and powerful people apparently committed suicide while on suicide watch at his prison, and the footage can't be found due to a malfunction of the camera. But The news told me that's how it happened, and the news is never wrong. A guy I worked with was riding his dirt bike through the woods and somebody hung a cable between two trees. My buddy caught his throat on it and saw the dude steal his dirt bike. Woke up in the hospital with a lacerated throat and a broken larynx. Pretty crazy what somebody will do for something so cheap. During World War II, an American airplane crashed near the Japanese island of Shishijima. There were 9 servicemen on board. 1 was rescued by an American submarine. The other 8 were taken in by the Japanese. Don't want to go into all the details. But through some time and events, the Japanese ended up eating those servicemen. But that's not the weird part. The one serviceman who was rescued? That was George H.W. Bush. Google Shishijima incident for more details if you'd like. I was in a crappy motel. The room had bedbugs. I was too exhausted to go to the front desk. I just needed to make it until the morning. I slept in the tub. Hours later I hear someone breaking through the window. I had a big knife with me and ran out into the room to find a man halfway through my window. We stared for a while at each other in shock. I think we both were scared. Then he says, "Is this your room?" I'm like, "Yes. This is my room, man." More staring. Then he slowly starts backing out while cursing me for leaving my window unlocked and not expecting him to break in. Motel on Watauga, Sacramento. One night about 2 years ago, I believe it was spring and it was about 9 or 10 at night. A bit of context: my mother is a photographer and she has one of those big expensive cameras. Now I was just sitting in my room playing Xbox with my buddies and I heard the commotion of my family in the doorway to the backyard, the kind of commotion of people gawking, so I went out to see what it was all about. I go to my dad and ask what it is and he says there's something in our backyard and my mom is out there trying to get pictures but her flash isn't working. And she's right at the fence trying to get pictures, and all of a sudden the flash goes off and lights up the pitch black yard, and right in front of my mom is a bear stood up on its back legs just standing there. By the time the flash was done, my mom was nearly in the house. Every year thousands of children go missing all over the world, and at most you hear about a few per year in your area. Noon seems to care. It is literally a nuisance to many to have a "have you seen my child" ad pop up on their social media. I work at a max security prison and we have several inmates who are severely mentally ill. The ones that self-harm wear a Fitbit kind of thing to monitor heart rate. If there is a change, we rush their room to stop whatever is happening. On top of this, we also do visual inspections. On one round, a coworker was doing cell checks and noticed this particular inmate had blood on their face, but nothing came up on the monitors or anything. So he called to the inmates to ask if they were okay. The inmate had their eyes closed and just kept repeating, "It doesn't hurt." The inmate would not answer where the blood was from. We opened the cell to see what the situation was, and it turns out the inmate had plucked out both of their eyes and they were laying on the floor. The inmate's HR monitor never alerted and the inmate never screamed. Paramedics said the inmate's vitals were normal and the inmate was fully responsive. The Battle of Ossoisi Fortress, 1915. German troops attempted to gas the Russian defenders out as the fort had been a thorn in the side of the Germans since the outbreak of war. The gas succeeded in killing almost 3 whole companies. The Germans then advanced across the fields, expecting the fortress to be empty and an easy victory. From within the fortress, Russian troops emerged, coughing up blood and lung fragments, covered in bandages made up as improvised gas masks as well as chemical burns. They returned rifle and light artillery fire at the advancing Germans. The German troops didn't bother firing back as they just ran back to their lines. Their commanders claimed they are already dead. "Give it 20 minutes and go take the place," to which the soldiers remarked, "It is not men protecting that place." But the Devil Ossoisi Fortress never fell during the war, as when the German troops went back months after, there was already fresh defenders. I know this story is much different to the ones other people have said, but it's the one I could think of as truly terrifying. It happened to my mom's friend a couple of years back. She was driving on the highway in the middle of nowhere, as in far away from any town. Suddenly a car that is passing on her left steers fully to the right in front of her, causing her to brake and steer very rashly. This obviously causes her to lose control and crash against a tree. She passed out, and sometime later, she couldn't really tell how much time passed. A group of Brazilians, all of this happened in Portugal, came to her rescue and told her things like, "Don't move. We're calling an ambulance. Just hang on there," etc. She eventually passes out again, and about 2 hours later someone else comes and starts helping her again, and eventually the ambulance and her husband arrive. She tells them that some other people have been there before, but the guy that found her says no one was there. When they checked the trunk, everything had been stolen, including computer, camera, etc. She later said that she remembers thinking the car that made her crash had been following her for a while and driving a little too close. Make of that what you want. Sorry for my English. Last week I would have said the Japanese war crimes or the rape of Nanking. But frankly, for me it's the fact that absolutely nothing is going to come of the Jeffrey Epstein arrest and connections. That some of the most influential people on earth are totally and visibly able to manipulate the system to cover the fact that they are rapists, pedophiles, and murderers. My long-term partner decided to end his life suddenly and unexpectedly a few years ago. He was the happiest person I knew, and even with 20/20's hindsight videos, pouring through old messages, etc., I wouldn't be able to identify any warning signs. My friend's boss bought an Audi A4 convertible back when they were new and interesting. One of the talking points was the pop-up roll hoops that were hidden unless you rolled it. A few months after buying it, he got to test those roll hoops out. As he lost control and skidded down a steep bank about 10 m, 35 feet deep. The roll hoops did their job, and he survived with just cuts and scratches from the bushes he'd plowed through. The car ended up the right way up and he got out, walked back up the bank to the side of the road, then got on the phone to the police to report the accident. While he was standing there, a driver from a car that had seen the accident came over to speak to him. Approaching from behind, the other driver asked if he was okay. My friend's boss turned around to reply and dropped dead. His neck had been fractured, but was in one piece right up until he turned his head, when it severed his spinal cord. My mom didn't tell me this story for the longest time. I think just so she wouldn't unnecessarily worry me when I was younger. But my parents split up when I was about 4 years old, and my mom and my sisters stayed in a small townhouse for a few years before moving in with my stepdad. Anyway, while we were at the townhouse for I think less than a year, my mom heard something in her room in the middle of the night, and when she woke up to go look, there was a man in her room. She audibly gasped and got out of bed either to fight or run to our room. She couldn't really decide cause she was pumped full of adrenaline. The guy ended up running out of our back door, and when the police came they found signs of forced entry. She never told any of us the full story cause we were still sound asleep the entire time, but she ended up explaining more of it the older we got.